to go to, but I can never keep them all straight. So I usually just drive around in a circle in Minneapolis until I find a Lifetime. And so when I got there, I kind of walked out in the main part of the gym where there's, power cages and machines and things like that. And then I walked into the very back room, which is, I think, sort of considered their like cross training, like CrossFit facility, which is unbelievable facility. Like I was so hyped to see the equipment they had in there, just the way the room was laid out, when a place is put together, when it's conducive for hard work. And so I was happy to be back in that corner by myself, also because I was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to make a scene. No one's going to have to interact with me. Like, I'm not going to bum anyone out by making noises or doing my weird stuff. I think I had an SS bar that I wrapped a bunch of towels around because the pad wasn't thick enough for my neck. Yeah. And I went up to the front desk and I asked the front desk for some Scotch tape. So I wrapped all the towels around the SS bar and Scotch taped it. And I was like, dude, if I was in the middle of the main room with this, it would just be such a situation for everyone. But no, I had a really good training session in there, and then kind of ran into you. So it was a really good day. And I think that was the day before Christmas, right? It's Christmas Eve.
I believe so.
Yeah. And it was kind of wild because I think I had mentioned this to you, but when we spent Christmas together with the family the next day, then Katie and I drove back to Chicago, and then we actually flew out to Asia like the next morning. So it was a really wild trip, and we went all over the place. We went to Tokyo, we went to Seoul, we went to Vietnam, and then we ended up in Australia before we came back home. So it was a really crazy 3-4 weeks there right after I saw you.
Yeah. Were you able to train over there, or was it more of just the, rest and relaxation?
The reason I'm laughing about it is that generally if Katie and I travel, it's usually more just checking off boxes, seeing how many places we can go, getting into whatever we can get into. And so usually we don't really come home rested or relaxed. And I actually feel a little more stressed out when I get home, than before I left. But looking back on it, the experiences that we have and the things that we got to see and the people we got to hang out with, like that's really what matters to me. Maybe that'll change when I get older. I'm sure when I'm older, I'll probably want the, chilling on the beach kind of shit.
Yeah.
But no, I got to lift over there. I lifted pretty much every country we were in. I trained jiu-jitsu in Vietnam. Went to a really nice academy there called Kimura Jiu-Jitsu. And all the gyms were really nice to us, really helpful. And I didn't miss one training day from the minute we left until we came back. So it was a blast. But yeah, definitely it was a nice little holiday there. We got to spend New Year's in Seoul, Korea, which is an experience, so that was pretty rad. But yeah, I wanted to ask you about how you got into mobility, flexibility, physical therapy. What was the genesis of that? When did that begin for you, and how did it turn into what you're doing now?
Yeah, it really started when I was 8 years old. I started playing soccer. I didn't start playing basketball until probably in high school. But when I was 8 years old, started with soccer, and that's when I got my first sport injury. I would sprain my ankles, and I got plantar fasciitis at the age of 8. So I was always on the search from 8 years on to find a way to get pain-free. And it ended up being a ton of injuries from 8 to about 25. And so I was always on the search, got a kinesiology degree, learned from some of probably the smartest minds in the industry, just trying to find a program that worked for me, that got me pain-free. So that was ultimately what led me to where I'm at today, and the information that I share. It's all information I learned from somebody else, somebody smarter than me, and I'm lucky that I'm able to be pain-free. And that's the short of it. That's been the journey for me.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then I did have a weird question for you. I just wanted to see what you thought about it. But you mentioned plantar fasciitis, right? And obviously, there's a lot of causes for that. It's a big problem for a lot of people, whether you're athletic or not athletic. Everyone deals with it at some point in their life. And I myself have had it too, so I do have some personal experience with it. I think I started experiencing it when probably I was about 35, and I think it was from a lot of heavy lifting. Movements probably weren't perfect, not that they have to be, but they could have been better than they were. I was
Yep.
just making stuff happen, with weight on the bar. And when I started, recording a lot of the sets that I was doing, I started noticing that things were out of position, and some of it was mobility, flexibility. Some of it wasn't. Some of it I just didn't realize that I was lifting the weight in the way that I was. Like, man,
Mhm.
you're leaning off to the right like an inch for no reason. Like, you just weren't even aware of it, right? Um, filming the barbell from the side when I'm doing a squat or a deadlift, and realizing like a bar path is not as square as you think it is. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So when I started correcting all of those things and making it look as square as possible and just being a lot more conscious of it, um, my plantar fasciitis went down by like probably 85%. And obviously I did a lot of other things. I spent a lot of time rolling my foot out on a lacrosse ball,
Yep.
stretching my calves, strengthening my calves, working
Yep.
on my tib strength, making sure that, my hamstrings were mobile. They weren't like super tight on one side and super loose on the other
Mhm.
side. So there's a lot that went into it. But the question I had for you is, how much do you think alignment and squareness and just things being more neutral in the body are related to people having plantar fasciitis and not?
Yeah, I think most of the injuries happen from an imbalance. So I think plantar fasciitis, is a result of an imbalance. And, when we're really young, we're kind of like super athletes, like superhuman.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get that first injury or traumatic experience, and that's when we start to lock up and our movement pattern is no longer natural. Um, and so that's kind of, what I see with the plantar fasciitis is I got injured and I started to lock up, and then I wasn't flowing naturally. It wasn't
Yeah,
like a, a neutral movement. It started to become unaligned. And once you're out of balance, that's when they can show up anywhere.
yeah, yeah. So there's a lot to that, right? I mean, it's not just a placebo effect in your brain where you're like, oh, I'm moving better, I'm feeling better. Like there's a direct result of that. I've noticed it with my own clients too, so it's a little bit of a setup question, but I was really curious about your perspective on it, because we all have our own super firm beliefs about what works in the gym for us and the
Yeah.
people we work with too. But I don't always get the chance to talk to someone who's outside of my gym, who has their own opinion on it. A lot of the trainers here, we're not all the same, but you know,
Yeah.
we use a lot of the same protocols and borrow things from each other, so um and I wanted to ask you too. You mentioned that you got a lot of information from some smarter people, and it sounds like you listened a lot to what was going on around you and how people approach problems they were having with themselves or other athletes. And I wanted to ask you, like, where were you in those situations? Was that like a coach, or was that like some kind of coordinator you were working with, or like who did you stumble upon along the way that like really set you off on that path?
Yeah, one of the first people was a physical therapist that I was sent to immediately after I started spraining my ankles at 8. And he's been in my life ever since, and he's been very, very helpful. Um, he is like anybody that I've gone to that is helpful. If you go there and you're transparent with needing the help and wanting to learn from them, they'll provide it. The only people that I've found that don't provide help are the ones that are, grifting, or they don't really know how to help. They might send you off or not respond to your DM. But the guys I've learned from, more of like mentors, have been uh, very helpful, not just to me, but to the communities, as a small communities, in my hometown, but also as a worldwide community. And that's the beauty of social media, is that, we can create this bigger community for the world to see. And it's, from a source of, people like yourself that are willing to actually help and give away information without holding back.
Yeah. Yeah, I've kind of always been like that, even outside of my work. My fiance, Katie, she, always like kind of looks at me like, oh God, man, you got to talk to everyone. Like, you know what I mean? You're always like, you're always like involved with someone wherever we're at. Just something always comes up. There's always a reason to like touch base with people. I've always kind of been like that, you know. And it's funny because on one hand, I'm kind of an introvert, you know, but in the right situation with the right person and the right topic, I'm actually the polar opposite. It just depends on, you know, what we're dealing with there. But the funny thing is that as far as social media goes, if you're willing to reach out to people and you're not afraid of getting turned down or not afraid to not have someone respond to you, a lot of times people will get back to you about stuff, is what I've learned, you know, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. Like, you just have to be willing to actually reach out to people and say, hey, like, I need help with this, or I'm curious about this, or would you like to do this thing? And a lot of times I find myself surprised by people's reactions and willingness to, you know, to get involved with whatever weird idea I have, you know, or whatever interest I'm trying to figure out, you know. And have you had that same experience with a lot of people?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was really shy as a kid, so I didn't want to ask anybody for help, including my coaches, because I was always nervous that they would turn me away or, um, tell me that I was stupid. So I was very apprehensive to talk to people. And I know a lot of kids on the Instagram, they're probably in the same boat with social media. They may look at somebody like yourself or myself and be like, oh, I don't feel comfortable talking to them. They might just turn me away, or I'll feel stupid myself. But once I was able to overcome that and start to build some self-confidence, especially from things like lifting weights in sports, it opened up myself to being more forthcoming with people that seemed to know more than me. I was able to kind of get out of my shell and just be myself, and just straight up ask for help, because that's, ultimately how the community learns, is the people that know more pass it on to the youth, and the youth, helps the youth coming after them. And that's, that we can learn a lot from even people that are younger than us. I've learned a lot from athletes and coaches that are younger than me as well. So it hasn't just been the older mentors in me.
Yeah.
Like I said, I try to learn from everybody, but what have you found, has been more of your source of help and information as you've been over a decade in the industry?
Well, I think a lot of it comes from, like I mentioned earlier, my own gym, you know, and on the topic that you just kind of brought up about younger people, in my case, it might be younger people, but it might also be people that are newer to, bodybuilding or powerlifting, weightlifting. They just bring in fresh ideas, they approach things from an angle that I couldn't, because they sort of entered this whole game from a different place. My introduction to this was a slow burn. You know what I mean? It started off just kind of lifting weights at the YMCA for fun with friends, and then that turned into longer training sessions, normal than the average person. You know what I mean? I just found myself working out for 2 hours, and that's not the average Joe, and that eventually turned into me being obsessed with bodybuilding. And then that turned into me focusing on nutrition and eating in ways that most people don't eat, very disciplined. And it just kind of got me into powerlifting and all those things. So when you get into it in that way, I think it's preferable, because you're setting yourself up to be committed for your whole life that way. It's just become such a routine, such a habit, and there's no way it'll never be broken for me, But some of the newer people that get into it now, they got into it because of social media, or they got into it because they found a coach they knew, and all of a sudden they're powerlifting now, And so just the way that they approach lifting is 100% different. They didn't have to spend 10 years struggling with horrible information and bad ideas and trial and error to make things work. So they'll come right in, and there's 5 things they're doing that makes their progress just skyrocket, Yeah. And I pay attention to that. I don't look at those people as new people, as like, oh, you got to pay your dues, man, before I know your name and before I pay attention to you and talk to you. It's like polar opposite. I'm like, if I see you doing a good warm-up, I'm going to ask what you're doing. I'm going to ask who showed that to you, what you think about it. There's a guy named Ryan that trains in here. He's been lifting for a while, but not forever, and he was doing this really cool warm-up where he had a band attached to a pole, and the other end of the band was wrapped around his shoulder, and he was just doing different swimming motions, and he was doing uppercut motions and just kind of opening his arm. And I asked him, I was like, yo, what is that? And he's like, oh, my coach told me to do it. It's something I do before bench, and just kind of opens up my whole shoulder, gives me the range of motion I need. It kind of distracts the shoulder and gets the joint into a little bit of a different position before I start moving weight with it. And I was like, well, that's cool, but what do you feel? And he's like, oh, I just feel like I can get a better arch. I feel like I can, get my arm involved more into the press, things like that. And, and so like if someone's around me doing something that's interesting, I'm going to go right to them and figure out what it is, get their take on it, tie it into my own training, and see what I think about it, So for right now, that's kind of what I'm doing. Even with newer trainers, I'll see a newer trainer that has only been training here for a year, and I'll borrow stuff from them, whether it's an accessory exercise, if it's an idea for cardio or conditioning that I think is clever and fun, I'll borrow it. So I feel like the direction kind of goes both ways. I like it like that. I feel like it keeps my work young, like I don't want to age as a trainer or as a coach and be looked at as a person that was like really good at their job at one point and then fell out of the times, you know what I mean? And didn't pay attention to like the advancements of like where all this is going, So I feel like I'm keeping the good stuff from what was original and like considered like OG, even though I'm not that old, but some of the younger kids look at what I do as like, man, that's like old crap from the 90s or the 2000s, So I kind of borrow from anyone, but the last thing I wanted to mention about that too is that when I first started personal training, I was at a really, really small gym, like kind of a corporate chain place, but it's tiny, real tiny. And then I built such a big business out of that place that I eventually went to an independent training studio in a nicer neighborhood. And the guy who owned that place was a physical therapist. He was a naturopath. He was really just super open-minded about how he trained, to the point where he was probably misunderstood, I would say, by people. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I never really looked at it like that 100%. I tried to look at it like, what can I borrow from this guy? What kind of philosophy can I take away from him? And he's not afraid to get out of the box. He's not afraid to look silly. He's not afraid to carve his own path. You know what I mean? And I also looked at it too. Like I was like, personal training, is like, some people consider it a very saturated industry, but I don't think it is. I think it's saturated depending on your approach. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with like mobility, flexibility, like physical therapists on the internet, right? It is super saturated, but it all depends on how you go after it. You know what I mean? So he taught me a lot about like, don't be afraid to get into things and try things and see what works for you. And then also like create your own niche in your industry, and then you are a very necessary person to everyone around you, so that guy was huge for me, and just opened up a lot of ideas and potential, like, like sort of business opportunities too, which sounds like that's kind of what happened to you, right? In essence.
Yeah. Very similar paths.
Yep. What is your background with sports, as far as like, I know you said you played soccer, you played basketball. Did you play that up into like high school, or how long did you play basketball for?
Yeah, I played basketball and soccer throughout high school and in college. And then I played basketball, lower level pro after college for a couple of years. Ultimately, the injuries just took their toll on me. I couldn't continue. I was just so broken down that I had to, take time off. And when you take time off at the pro level, anything over a couple months, it's almost impossible to get back into. So that's why, getting pain-free and staying pain-free is probably the utmost importance for athletes, especially basketball players.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could see too where, for you, it's like, it's almost a survival tactic where if you're playing at that level, and your injuries are adding up, it's like, yeah, you want to get better to be able to play again, but I'm sure you probably just wanted to get better to be able to like feel okay again as a human being, right? Like in day-to-day life, I would imagine that was probably your first priority after a while.
Yeah, I mean, when you get out of bed and you first step, feels like somebody's taking a knife to your, your heel. That's like the last thing you want to deal with on a not just a physical standpoint, but a mental, emotional. It will just wear you down. And I don't want anybody to have to experience the pain and injury that I had. And I know some people even have it worse than me. So yeah, that's always something in the back of my head is uh, how, getting pain free is a lot bigger than just the physical. It really opens up your mind, and then you can go after whatever it is, whether it's powerlifting, basketball, jujitsu,
Yeah.
working in the, banking industry, whatever it is. It's
Yeah.
not all, we're all on our own path, but we're all very much alike. And that's, what makes the human race so unique is that we have our expertise, we have our niches, but we share more in common than we have not in common.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And when you first started kind of diving down that path of trying to become more pain free, what kind of like mobility exercises were you doing then? Like when you first started really, really getting into that, like what kind of tools did you use? And then how did that advance into what you're doing now? I was just curious because I mean, I have a plethora of equipment that I use for mobility. And it's changed over the years. If I look at my main 5 things that I use, it's not what I started off with originally. Let's say back in, 2013 is probably when I started really doing a lot of mobility and focusing on that. And I was just kind of curious, like what kind of tools you started off with or lack thereof, and what kind of things you use now and how that progressed.
Yeah, starting off, with most sports teams, you go through a series of static stretches. You might do a dynamic warm up and stuff like that, which is great. I would never say not to do it. Dynamic stretching as well.
Totally.
And I still do a lot of those things. I just added in one of the things that's been very helpful, especially for my hamstrings, from a mobility point, is going backwards. So going backwards with the sled, walking backwards without resistance, and then sprinting. When you get pain-free, sprinting backwards, it really opens up the body and it helps the mobility from a non-obvious standpoint, as like stretching is a little more obvious, and then strengthening through full ranges.
Yeah.
That's something that I was always afraid of. I know a lot of the basketball players are afraid of doing that because of knee pain. They don't want to squat cheeks to sneaks. They want to, do the quarter squats because it's easier to complete those pain free, but going through the full ranges, taking the eccentric load all the way down and up has been huge for my mobility.
Yeah. I think there is definitely something to, wanting to avoid a bad recovery from a workout, and I can relate to that a little bit from the jiu-jitsu standpoint, because I've done jiu-jitsu for a long time now, but now I do it a lot more often than I did, say, 5 years ago. And I'm trying to get to a respectable level with that, where when I'm on the mat, I want to be able to push myself past just being like a good roll. I want to be, someone who's extremely difficult to deal with, and I'd like to be aggressive and dynamic. But I will say sometimes when I lift, I think about how is this lift going to affect jiu-jitsu tomorrow? And it does make you kind of like hold back a little bit. It does make you want to avoid getting into certain range of motions, because you're like, man, I can't really afford my adductor to be all jacked up tomorrow for jiu-jitsu, so maybe I'll cut it a little bit short, feel good for jiu-jitsu tomorrow, but like your strength is going down, your mobility is going down. And so it is really worth it to just deal with it in that 48-hour period or 72-hour period. But I understand how people get kind of, in that like avoidance mindset about their sport versus how they are lifting in the gym. But I think it's a trap. I think you kind of tell yourself certain stories that aren't necessarily true for how you're moving, and I think that's something that people can definitely work getting away from, myself included, and I'm glad you brought up the backwards walking, the backwards sled drag, and the backwards running, because I don't know if it was after you introduced yourself or before, but I do remember seeing you do like kind of quick jogs, or like it probably wasn't a full on sprint, but it was a much quicker pace than I usually see people running backwards.
Yep.
my day-to-day life. And like I said, I'm not judgmental at all in the gym. Like, I never think, oh man, that's weird, I wonder why the guy's doing that. But I definitely remember seeing that, and I was like, huh, that's kind of like odd, in the sense that I don't ever see anyone do that like that.
Yeah.
So I get the backwards walking, because obviously you're sort of training the other side of your body for that motion. I mean, how many steps do we get in a day or a year or a decade going forward, and maybe sideways, maybe.
Yep.
But you're kind of like correcting that ratio, right? Where
Yep.
you're giving the other side of the legs, the lower half, the work that it should get, in hopes of getting like a balance, right?
Yeah.
And then when you use a sled, you're essentially adding resistance to those muscles, right? And trying to up the capability of what they can withstand. Is that correct?
Yeah. It makes it more scalable. So you can be, 88 years old, and you can just pull the sled with no weight, and you can be somebody like yourself and really load it up. And so that's the beauty of it too, is that you're predominantly just concentric. So if you can't pull it, if it's too heavy, you'll just stop in your tracks. You won't have to worry about the weight towering down on your spine. You won't have to worry about those injuries that you could get from lifting too heavy and not being prepared for it. So that's huge, and then the backward sprinting is it just applies a little bit more elasticity to those movements, hitting the tendons a little bit more, and the ligaments. So it's all scalable, and that's the beauty of the backwards movement stuff, is it's easy to scale, and it's easy to find what you can do pain-free, and then advance on it. And then at times, what the biggest thing that I try to get across to the people that reach out is that there will be times, and you touched on it already, there will be times where you need to regress because you have a jujitsu, meet coming up, or you have a basketball game coming up. So the regressions, they can be a blow to the ego, because you're so used to being at a certain weight, you're so used to being at a certain speed, but the regressions are sometimes more important than the progressions.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And the other thing too, that I always sort of preached with powerlifting movements, but it's really true with anything, is that as long as you're doing it week to week, right, and you don't stop doing it, then you have much more of an opportunity to regress and get back to the intensity that you were happy with. Because the longer you've been doing that thing, the more you have the option of going back and doing it again. It doesn't mean that you have to do that intensity every week for a whole year straight. Otherwise, you can never do it again. And I think people think like that a lot, because, a lot of us, well, pretty much everyone that does anything challenging operates off of confidence, right? Like, I know you do, I know I do. If I'm confident in something, I have a higher likelihood of doing that thing really well. Sometimes that gets us in trouble where we don't want to back off because our confidence lowers down, but then we're also making ourselves more susceptible to not perform, whether that's in the gym or in the situation you're talking about. Like, if you're not willing to regress and exercise because you have something big coming up, then you're setting yourself up for failure, right? So my thing is just like, do it all the time. And then when you need to back off a little bit, don't worry about it. Don't feel bad about it. And then just look forward to going heavier the next time you can do that, when you have nothing to lose, when you have nothing to worry about, And that's been huge for me with lifting. I've learned over the years that I don't have to go 100% effort every single week on every exercise to be able to do that thing at a level that I'd like to, And I think that's true for the stuff you're talking about too.
Right. And to kind of maybe go in a little bit of a different direction, how has your lifting changed since you've added more jujitsu in?
Well, it's kind of a funny story, because in the very beginning, it really affected my lifting pretty negatively, to be truthful with you. Part of that, I think, was just getting used to the physical demands of it, and I didn't really expect it to affect me that bad. Part of it, I think, was also just my brain too, and being like, I exerted all the energy over there, so I don't know if I have that energy over here. And that's not true at all. If you look at like football players, the way they train in the gym, and then they go play a football game, they're running, they're tackling, they're getting tackled, they're exerting so much energy, and they'll be right back in the gym the next day lifting weights. And they don't think like that. They're not thinking like, oh God, I don't think I can lift hard today because I played a football game yesterday. They're football players,
Yep.
and that's just what you do. So I really had to sort of change my mindset after a while and be like, okay, I do jujitsu. I also lift weights. I'm going to do both of those well. They're similar in that sense, but they're not alike at all in other ways, you know? So once I shifted my thought process about it, it got a lot better and I became a lot less exhausted. I was able to train jujitsu well. I was also able to lift at a level that I was previously. So, but that took like 2 years to get to that point. I also went through a lot of neck injuries early on because jiu-jitsu is so demanding on your neck, just like wrestling is. I also probably left my head out there a lot for a while and not realizing it, like just letting my head dangle in front of people and getting it clubbed or getting it snapped down or getting it choked on, you know. So after a while, I realized I'm like, okay, if you just keep your head up in a way and keep your posture and don't make yourself, you know, a target, then you don't have to deal with as many neck issues. And I also realized, like, if I'm taking someone down, that, you know, you don't always have to ram them with your head at the same time. Like, there's ways where you can take people down and, you know, you can do things without making yourself vulnerable. So that was pretty huge for me too. But now they don't really affect each other too much. The hardest part of the day is just waking up. It's just like, if I go to jiu-jitsu the night before, getting out of bed that next day might be kind of rough. But by the time I lift 4 or 5 hours later, I'm totally fine. But it took me a long time to be able to like think in a certain way where I'm like, okay, be positive. Like if you're sore, don't think your lifting is going to be bad. If you're exhausted, don't tell yourself you're going to lift tired. But it took a long time to get to that point. And I think that's why a lot of people are afraid to dabble in both worlds, because they don't want to experience those downsides. But you can definitely get out of it. It's just that you have to like create that path and figure out what the strategy is going to be to get yourself there, you know? But some of the highest level jiu-jitsu people in the world at this point, they look like bodybuilders. You know, I mean, that was never a thing when I first started doing jiu-jitsu. It was like polar opposite. And now people are lifting hard. They're big, they're muscular, they're also fast. They're lean, you know, and they're a problem for a lot of people to deal with, you know. And that also gave me the green light too, because in the beginning I was the only person I knew that lifted and did jiu-jitsu. And I was like, that's weird. I don't know. Like maybe that's a bad thing. You know, and now you look at jiu-jitsu people, like you look at top 25 in the world, and like most of those guys are pretty jacked, you know, and now I'm like, yeah, it's cool that I'm doing that. That is a good thing. You know, I'm glad I stuck with it. And early on, a lot of people try to deter me from that too, you know, like, oh, stay in your lane, man. Like you're a lifter. You don't need to be doing jiu-jitsu, you know, or I had certain people make comments like, oh man, you're big and bulky. I don't know if you're going to be able to move around on the mat the way you want to, you know? And I just use that as like more reasoning to keep leaning into each of those things harder, you know, because I'm just a stubborn person at heart, you know. So what kind of things do you do now, aside from kind of like lifting in the gym? Do you dabble with basketball? Do you play any soccer now? Is there anything you do athletic now that you've gotten your body in a healthier position? Because I was curious when you mentioned earlier, you're like, oh yeah, like when I got to that pro level, I was in a pretty poor state. And then I got my body in order and kind of created a career out of it. And I was just curious, like, what are you able to do now in a healthy manner as far as like athleticism goes?
So I train pro basketball players, so I'm able now to play with them and hold my own, which I wasn't able to do when I was young and injured. So it's
pretty
been
impressive.
It's I tell people all the time, I was probably, you know, in high school picking it up late. You know, I got awards, but I was the worst basketball player that was getting awards. I just worked my butt off. It wasn't that I was good at the sport. I just, like you, I was stubborn and I wouldn't back down, and I would always play good defense. I would always bust my butt to get the rebounds. And now I'm able to do those things, but I'm also able to get into the skills and do it pain-free, which that really helps the sport, whether it's basketball or any sport. Once you're pain-free, you're going to learn quicker. You're going to be able to evolve quicker. So even things like playing with my nephews and nieces, like sitting on the floor, like they sit on their knees and stuff like that. I used to not be able to do that. So it changed my whole life getting pain-free.
Yeah. that's pretty incredible to come from such a low point, and, you definitely probably have the option to sort of just like, recede into the night,
Yeah.
and start a different chapter of your life and just leave all that behind and just be like, oh, I'm just like the broken guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was fun while it lasted. And it's very cool to hear that you're able to play with like high level players at this point and move around with them. And like, instead of just coaching, like you're actively being able to work with them too. So I would say that's nice proof in your entire philosophy that like, hey, anything can happen to you and there's still a way for you to come back and adjust based on what your approach is.
Yeah, I'm more athletic in my 30s going into my late 30s. I'm way more athletic than I was in my whole life. So it's easier for athletes to connect. It's easier for them to see the worth and the value when you're able to show them firsthand versus traditional coaching in the past. When I was growing up, it would just be, somebody sitting down and telling you what to do versus showing you, and showing and knowing it opens up everything. And it not only helps them see it, but it helps them build more confidence in you, which ultimately build more confidence in themselves.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to mobility, flexibility work, any PT work, I think being able to offer those visuals is so huge. I think a lot of people do learn from hearing the information and, taking notes on it and studying it, but being able to see it in action, being able to see how it's supposed to be performed, I think is so key to picking that up as a habit and then also doing the exercise correctly in the first place.
Yeah.
And I meant to ask you too, I think I kind of dove into it with you earlier, but I just wanted to double check. So earlier when I'd asked you kind of like about your sort of approach to mobility, flexibility, you kind of talked to me about like, the dynamic stretching stretching and then dynamic movements before games and things like that. Do you use a lot of like kettlebells for your mobility work at this point, or are you pretty heavy into bands? Are you heavy into any like flossing type of tools? Do you use any lacrosse balls or like PVC pipes or anything like that for your mobility? I just wanted to see like what kind of stuff you're really into, what kind of stuff you kind of deviated away from over the years. I just wanted to see what your thoughts were because we use a lot of that stuff here, but I wanted to see like what kind of things you utilize on a regular basis or don't.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that you can utilize. I try to use it all, the floss bands, resistance bands, chains, especially when squatting, stuff like that. And I try to not overextend myself by adding everything in and making it too hard to digest. But I do like to use as much as I can because there's, everything that I've seen in the gym culture that was created can be used for good, or it can be used for, to kind of break you down and not build you up. So it's kind of just the mindset and the approach. I try to, like I said about learning from everybody, I try to learn from all the equipment that I come across. And I try to find the value in everything to be able to, to get more flexible and to be able to prepare for these, high level performances, whether it's the lifting part or the sports part.
Yeah. I think whatever works for you is good. I think certain people really like, this tool or that tool, and other people, it doesn't do anything for them and they do something completely different. And I think as long as you have a plan in place of some type, I think that's kind of what the goal is, and for running a powerlifting gym, well, we're a powerlifting gym, but the business side of it really, services a lot of the general public. So like if you look on the Instagram, that's kind of like our highlight reel, and that'll be like, all right, here's the crazy shit that happened in the last couple of weeks in the gym, just so people were like, when they see it, it grabs their attention and they're like, holy crap, that's insane, right? And most people, when they see that, they want to get a little part of that for themselves. Like they may not want to squat 800 pounds like our guy TJ here that does, but they do want to know what it's like to squat something on their back that feels like it's a house on your back and you're still able to stand up with it successfully. Like that does a lot for you as a person, right? But if you're a powerlifting gym and you have the general public coming in and they want a taste of the powerlifting culture, but there's no warm-ups, there's no mobility protocol, there's no options on how to work on your body, that powerlifting gym is not going to last, right? Because people come in and they get shit right out. right? Injuries are going to happen no matter what. So I've almost made that a big part of my business plan. Everyone that comes in, whether they're a member, whether they're a programming client, whether they're a personal training client of mine or one of the other trainers, we really push like, hey, you have to do these 3 things before you squat. You have options. You don't all have to do the same stuff, but we want at least something in place. Like try not to walk right in and just throw a plate on the bar and start moving. And that's done a lot for us as a gym. It's helped our client retention as trainers. It's helped our member retention as far as, building and keeping a membership base with clients because they don't have reasons to leave because they generally stay healthy and train. They're not getting worked on all the time or they're not out with the chiropractor regularly, So, so those tools have really kept us alive as a gym and kept us progressing. And, it's just been such a huge part of this place. And I take a lot of pride in that. I know a lot of powerlifting gyms, that's not their main thing. Here it is, and I don't shy away from that at all. I'm not like, oh yeah, sorry, we do like a lot of mobility stuff. I know that's kind of weird. I'm like, no, that's the bread and butter. And if you're going to do this for decades on decades, then this has to be a part of your daily routine, whether you're in the gym or not,
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of your approach too with people that are, they're just trying to be healthy as a person, right? They don't have any high aspirations necessarily to do anything crazy as an athlete. They're just trying to like live their life. And you kind of service those people too, right?
Yeah. The social media isn't just, even though it's basketball biology, it's not just basketball. It's it's everybody. So like even, from an ankle mobility standpoint, the video we did, some people might lose their minds being like, these 2 strong guys got 10 pounds on their foot. Like, what good is that going to do for them? But that type of stuff is the bread and butter because it ultimately gets you pain free. So then you can, play with your kids or do jujitsu or whatever it is, pain free. And so that becomes that weighted mobility, becomes just as important, if not more important than the big lifts or the big bouts. Because ultimately without them, you'll end up, crash and burn.
No, yeah. And I've seen people on your Instagram, not even posts that you've reposted, but I've seen comments like on the video that you and I did, but even on other videos where your average Joe is like, hey man, I've been doing this for like 6 months and you saved my knee. I've been doing this for, the last 45 days and my elbow or my shoulder feels so much better. And that's not a story that you're making, putting that out there. Like I'll see you put those out there too. I think you should do that. But those are just random people making comments, and they're not going after anything crazy. They just, they just want to feel better and live their life. And I think it's kind of rad that you're doing that simultaneously, and then also helping people like me that do want to do dumb stuff, like I would like to be a black belt in jiu-jitsu one of these days and win a tournament. Like that'd be really awesome. I would like to have a 1,500 pound powerlifting total without doing a bunch of gear to get me there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So no, I think that's super, super rad. And I know that you're now in Minneapolis. Obviously that's where we met. You recently just relocated to Minneapolis, right? Was that in the fall or was that in the wintertime or?
Yeah, that'd have been about 3 months ago. I came over from LA. And I came over to help my sister, but also build this online program with my buddy that I met in LA, Kareem Maddox. So we created an online program that kind of is very similar to the social media. It's taking that and putting it into a program, and then also providing online coaching, which is it's not as big as people just putting their programs online. It's the actual coaching relationship from people sending their form in. Even for something as simple as the tibialis raise that we did in the video, they'll get a video of themselves doing it because, the simple things can be messed up. So they take videos, not only take videos and get the coaching, but it keeps them accountable. So you're able to get those results. You're able to get people pain free. And it's been a great adjustment. I really like Minneapolis. It's been, I grew up in the Midwest and then I lived in Tampa for 2 years, LA for just about 5 years. And it was definitely an adjustment coming back to the winter.
I bet.
But it's been awesome. And it's opened up a lot of cool opportunities, even just running into you the day before Christmas, stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
like, it's been a great adjustment being here.
Yeah, I'm sure you're happy to be home, and there's just something about the people in the Midwest,
Yeah.
for better or worse. Obviously, there's the downsides too, but just, man, just people here are so nice and just so easy to deal with and just so straightforward. And it's a great thing to be around. And I travel a lot, but whenever I come back here, I'm just like, God, it's so good to be home, so I'm definitely happy to have you in the Midwest. Um, and I wanted to ask you real quick, because I wanted to dive into that program that you mentioned a second ago a little bit more. So the program that you guys are running, you were saying does involve a lot of online coaching, right? And I think the online coaching thing is such a huge thing if we're not able to be with people in person, because, for example, if they're doing the tib raise like we were doing with that kettlebell, right? And they're not able to send any video in, you're not able to give any advice back. It's like that person could be doing that tib raise with their foot rotated out 2 inches to the outside for 6 months. So they're doing a lot of lateral work on the front of their leg, but the middle of it and the medial side of it aren't getting hit. And then the outcome is just, I mean, it may be worse than what they originally were getting, So that relationship there, I think, is so huge. And I have a handful of online people that I work with too. And you're right, like the accountability is a big part of it. Also correcting form, being simple. I mean, like, hey, adjust this, adjust that. Let's see what it looks like next week. By the way, good job. It's not a hypercritical thing. You're not being like, hey, I got you. That doesn't look good. Let's see a better squat next time. It's like actual
Right.
information that you can apply to your lift and build that relationship with a coach. And it's a very positive, fun thing. It's super productive. So I'm glad to hear that you're doing that same thing too. So tell me a little bit more about the program that you're doing with Carl Maddox. What's the name of it? And are there several options that people can sort of go to with this program? And just, kind of elaborate for me on what's involved with it.
Well, it's called Build a Player. It's kind of on the meaning about it is just, whatever you're playing, building up your attributes, building up your ability to be able to be not just pain free, but to be able to be like somebody like Kareem, who's going to the Olympics. Not everybody's going to have the same goals as Kareem. They may, it may be different, but it's all predicated on, building your player as yourself up. And, there's a lot of cool things within the program. Right now we're running it through Substack. So we have a newsletter and a sign up through the newsletter. And within that newsletter, we even offer the free program for free. So anybody, that's tuning in can go and check it out. They can see the videos of doing it. And the only thing we sell is the coaching relationship, because it takes time, a lot of time. You can't offer it for free. My goal, my whole life has been, since the shift has been to online, I want to get to a point where I can offer my services online for free. It requires a lot of sponsorship. It requires a lot of brands to come in and respect the vision. And we're getting there, but right now the coaching is paid, and then there's a couple programs within the coaching subscription that athletes can tap into and push their limits and get pain free.
That's pretty awesome. And you mentioned it was on Substack. Is that a website or is that an app? I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, it can be an app. You can access it through Google. It's a website/app. And it's free, so people can download it for free and access all the information for free. We try to put out at least 1 to 2 newsletters a week. We've focused a lot on Kareem's journey to Paris, to the Olympics, and what he's been doing to prep for that. And I'll continue to write more about my journey with knees over toes and just my background and what that looks like for the people using the program. And that's kind of our way to indulge more information than we would on social media, because and that's the nice thing about podcasts as well, is we're able to have longer range content where if somebody taps in, they can really hear a lot more, and that the communication, having the time to talk to somebody and then being able to listen to it is huge, because I think I think it was Dr. Phil, I think on the Joe Rogan podcast, that said that we're opening up our phones 350 times a day now. So
Yeah.
that can have a negative impact on the brain and the development of an athlete. So having something longer range, especially reading and then listening to people talk, having that communication is huge to build the community and to stay healthy and fit.
Yeah, that blew my mind when I heard that. I heard that on that same podcast. And I got to say that, I mean, I know I do a lot of work on my phone. I definitely use it for a large portion of my business. But there was a little bit of guilt and shame there when I heard that, and I was like, "Damn, dude, I know that I'm on the high end of that shit." You know what I mean? Like I'm productive. I do a lot of things in a given day, but I was like, "Man, that's gotta be curbed a little bit somehow." What's the name of the program that you and Kareem are running, though? I don't know if I got the name from you yet.
Yeah, it's called Build a Player.
Oh, Build a Player. Oh, yeah, you did say that.
Yep, the Build a Player program. Yep,
okay.
And that's the name. I think we'll keep the name consistent. I don't think we'll make adjustments to it. Yeah. It can be a little confusing. What is Build a Player? I think the younger generation understands it a little more because in the NBA video game, Build a Player is an option. For you to make your own player, take them to the NBA. And that's kind of where we got the inspiration from.
Yeah, it kind of does sound like a like the Tony Hawk game. Like you can put the uniform together, choose the board. You know what I mean? Like what accessories is that guy wearing or whatever. So I think that's kind of a clever name for the program. And how long have you guys been doing that together? Is that something that's relatively new, or has that been going for a little while now?
Yeah, I mean, our relationship has been, I think we've been together for. I've known him. He's like a brother to me. I think it's been about 4 years, but the online program, the Build a Player, has only been around for 2 months, so it's very, very new.
Okay, cool.
And we offered it for $20 a month for the coaching subscription. We're going to have to raise the price because there isn't enough time in the day to be able to service everybody at $20 a month. It just makes it very difficult. So we're running into that right now. So we'll raise the price here in the next week, but we're still making it affordable for majority of people that will tune in. And then the people that don't think that they can afford it, I encourage them to, find ways to make money in their community, whether it's mowing lawns or cleaning cars, just something. If you want to build your attributes, you want to build your ability, you have to sacrifice a lot, to achieve greatness.
Well, especially if it's going to add years on your life too. You know what I mean? There can be some adjustments made in everyone's life to be able to afford some stuff like that. Even if it's $40 a month. Is there any chance that you're going to end up going to Paris to watch him play, or have you thought about that?
Well, yeah, I think I will. I want to play with him. He does the 3v3 basketball with some of the top athletes in the world. There's so many high-level basketball players that aren't in the NBA, like Kareem, and people think that the NBA is, the only great basketball players in the NBA, but they're all around the world. They're playing in all these leagues. And the 3v3 I think it's only been in the Olympics the first time was the last Olympics, I believe, and this will be the second time. But it's a really cool rendition of the game because it's half court. You take it back to the 3-point line to reset. A lot of us young basketball players have dealt with that playing small-sided basketball.
Like pickup really games or whatever. If you find something in a park and you don't have the full court, sometimes those are the best games too. Because it's such close quarters, and you're sort of, there's like that, it's like a forced activity level, you know what I mean? That might not be there at all times on the full court. So I think that's kind of awesome, actually. There's a slight chance, I don't really know if it's for sure going to happen or not, but my fiance Katie really wants to go to Paris for the Olympics. So we might end up there too. I don't really know. We actually went this month, believe it or not. My birthday was in February. And Katie told me a while ago, she's like, I booked a flight for us somewhere for your birthday. You're going to be really excited about it. But she's like, you got to look nice because wherever we're going, like, you don't want to stand out, And I was like, that's weird. And she kept kind of hinting, like, might be New York or something like that. And I was like, I've been in New York before. Why is she making such a big deal about this, And then we got to O'Hare and she took me to the gate and it said Newark. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess we are going to New York. And she goes, no, we're actually going to Newark, and then we're going to Paris, and then we're going to London for your birthday. And that was like right after our other trip. So I was like a little traveled out, but man, when I got to Paris, I fell in love with that place. London was awesome. And then one of my clients had told me that they were going to go to Paris, her and her husband, to watch the Olympics. And I told Katie, I was like, man, I don't know if we could swing it, but I kind of want to go to Paris for the Olympics if possible. So yeah, I'll let you know if we end up out there. We'll have to meet up at some point. That'd be pretty insane to see you in Paris. Be like, yo, dude, what's going on?
Yeah, we'll go watch Kareem play, and they have a really good chance of winning a gold medal. The American national team is the number one ranked team for the 3v3 as well as the 5v5. So we'll have an opportunity if we end up there to go see him play, and yeah, we'll be able to do more videos in Paris. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, that'd be wild, right? Just two random dudes from the Midwest end up doing a video in freaking Paris.
Yeah.
How weird is that? No, I really enjoy doing this podcast with you. I think we should definitely do more down the road. And the idea that I had too is maybe down the road we could actually get into, some of the mobility protocols, given some examples on the podcast. Like you can be like, yo, here's one or two right now that I'm obsessed with, and kind of explain it, go through it. I could do the same thing, and be like, hey, I'm really into this right now. I think it's great, it's simple, it's easy to learn. And we could make that a part of our podcast so that people are kind of getting that side of it too, rather than just like the verbiage of it. They could actually see some of the stuff that we're doing in the gym, and I think that'd be really just like fun for both of us to actually, because you and I, there's nothing more enjoyable for us just to be on the gym floor, moving around, doing our weird shit. So I think that'd be kind of cool to make that part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, I pushed you the first time we met to do the ankle mobility video with me, because it's something we can reference right now, so that athletes and people can go, in the general population can go see it now after listening to this podcast. Yeah. And they can kind of see one of the things that is a mainstay for me. And I know you've had a good experience with it as well for the ankle mobility, and opening up the ankle is going to help everything. And yeah, doing more podcasts I think is a great, I think it's a great idea. This is not only helpful for the community, but it's helpful for me, to learn more from you, is a blessing.
Yeah. It kind of lets both of us just expand a little bit on stuff we're already doing. You're already doing your thing. You're serious about it. It's working out great. Same with me, but I kind of like to navigate out a little bit on a side angle, see what else we can do with it, see where it goes, and real quick, I want to leave some information for the people that are watching. I have a supplement nutrition guy that is doing some really good things with some supplements here that I take, and I always like to drop his information at the end of the podcast. But what's the website that people can find your program on, again, just so they know where to go if they're not on Instagram or they just want to get on the browser?
Yeah, we'll do Build a Player on Substack. So that's substack.com, and then look up Build a Player. Otherwise, if you have the social media, the link in my bio and then the link in Kareem Maddox's bio will take you straight to the Build a Player program. We're trying to make it as easy for people to find as possible. And we'll post more on our stories and stuff coming up here, especially when this podcast release, so that people can access it easily, because sometimes it can get confusing with the internet and social media, where to go and how to find things.
Yeah, and I'll do the same thing. I'll definitely link the crap out of your guys' website, and I'll put the podcast on the stories, and I'll also post your guys' Instagrams as well, so people can find it pretty easily. The website that I wanted to mention is eternalnutrition.com. It's spelled EATERNAL nutrition.com. You might want to check it out too. Really rad stuff. So the guy basically makes protein from actual flowers. And so all of the crap that's in a lot of the protein powders and supplements out there today, he's basically found ways to make that same type of material, but off of ingredients that people used 2,000 years ago. And it's also basically a nutrition profile that we really don't get today. Like, people are not eating flowers, like I don't eat that shit. I know you don't either, but it's a really great protein source. There's great health benefits for it. The taste is pretty decent for what you're drinking, but it also assures that you're not taking in any garbage that's going to harm you long term when you're trying to keep your muscles fed short term. You know, and he's just a friend of mine. He's a jiu-jitsu guy that came up with this this company, and you know, it's like he's not giving me any cash. I just really firmly believe in what he's doing, and I think it's a really good project. So I always like to tell people to check that out if they can. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. You know, I'll support you in any way that I can, and I'll continue forwarding your information that you put out there. And you know, and I just I'm really happy we were able to do this today. It's fun.
Yeah, having me on, and I appreciate the connection that we were able to make in Minnesota. And at some point, my family, a majority of my family is a big family, but majority of my family is in Chicago area. So I look forward to getting down there and getting in the gym, and not just getting content, but being able to, spend time, because I've been, I spend the most of my life single, so I stay in the gym probably more than I should. So, maybe you and the missus can show me how to live life outside of the gym in Chicago, because I can get one track minded a little bit.
Yeah. Now, Katie's a big foodie. She's got me into that, and I tell you, man, there are some really good spots here that we could take you. So let me know, and whether I'm here or not, access to this gym is all yours. So if you're in town,
I appreciate it,
and you did in, just hit me up, and I'll definitely open the door for you. So, but thanks again. I'll definitely be in touch when it's time to do another podcast, and we'll make it happen, man. So thank you.
Awesome.
Again.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, dude. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. Bye.